This is the Protestant Libertarian Podcast, a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute and part of the Christians for Liberty Network. I really hope that you guys enjoy today's show. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. My guest today is Zach Weissmueller. Zach is a senior producer at Reason Magazine and has been heavily involved in Reason's video journalism since 2010. He is also the co-host of the Just Asking Questions podcast with Liz Wolfe. A recent Reason article written by Wolfe was critical of the current state of the Libertarian Party. This drew many Reason staffers, Zach included, into a heated debate with the Mises Caucus wing of the LP and others who are philosophically aligned with them. Today, we will be discussing that controversy, and Zach will explain his position on the LP, the Mises Caucus, Chase Oliver, Reason Magazine, libertarian philosophy, and more. Zach, welcome to the Protestant Libertarian Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to have you here today. Before we get into the controversy, tell us about yourself, your background, and your work.
Sure. I am a senior producer at Reason. I've been there over a decade now, mostly making documentaries for them. In recent years, I've ventured into the podcast space, as you mentioned at the top of your introduction there with my co-host, Liz Wolfe. We host a podcast called Just Asking Questions, where we try to go deep on a topic for an hour, 90 minutes, and bring in data slides and play clips and just try to get, a little bit deeper than the sort of superficial takes that you get on Twitter or kind of drive-by commentary. You can, I would love for anyone who gets anything out of this conversation to subscribe to that, and also just check out Reason TV, and you'll see all of my work over there.
Yeah, and you guys have had a really great slate of guests on the podcast too, so I know that my audience would be really interested in the work that you guys do there. But I guess that brings us to the first topic of conversation today. Your co-host, Liz Wolfe, wrote an article a couple of weeks ago entitled "Has the Libertarian Party Lost Its Way?" which was very critical of the Mises Caucus direction that the party has taken over the last couple of years. That generated obviously a lot of controversy and another endless round of libertarians fighting on Twitter. So I want you to talk about that article a little bit and then just the controversy that article generated.
Sure. And fighting on Twitter is got to be the favorite pastime of all libertarians. So I'm not going to, discourage that by any means. But Liz's article was about donors and longtime members of the Libertarian Party fleeing post-Reno reset. She knew, based on publicly filed numbers, that the party was struggling on some of those measures and wanted to get the story of why by talking directly with some of the people who had left. People had already been attacking her before the publication of the article because she'd put out a call on social media soliciting some sources for the story. And then, of course, a second wave of attacks followed because people don't like negative facts or reactions to their projects being publicized. What I saw in Liz's article were activists and party members voicing their feelings that the party's messaging was hostile and alienating from their perspective. And then in terms of managing the party's finances and strategy, some of them voiced the opinion that the new leadership was disrespectful, arrogant, incompetent. And that was the general thrust of Liz's article and how it came about and the backlash that ensued.
So there are a couple of aspects of the article that I want to ask you about. The first one, and this was one that I think a lot of people were critical of, there weren't a lot of people from the Mises Caucus that were interviewed specifically for that article. Was there a particular reason for that, or what was the logic behind that?
You'd have to ask Liz about her sourcing. I wasn't the author of the article. I did produce a documentary at the recent convention, which I hope we can, link in this episode.
Yeah.
And also a text accompaniment where I interviewed, Dave Smith, who's a Mises Caucus affiliated person. I interviewed Maj Touré, who's been affiliated with the Mises Caucus. Interviewed Michael Rechtenwald, the preferred candidate of the Mises Caucus pre-Edible Gate. And so there's sort of different stories are going to have a different amalgamation of sources in them. Liz's article was much more focused on the critics of the Mises Caucus. My take was very, grounded in what happened at the actual convention. And so I was speaking to people on the ground there. I also produced a documentary with Nick Gillespie 2 years ago about the Reno reset, where it was almost, it was a mixture of Mises people and sort of the former leadership. I think Liz's objective in this was to tell a very specific story about, she looked at the numbers, she looked at the membership numbers, she looked at the revenue, and she wanted to get to the why of that. And that mostly entailed talking to the people who were no longer donating to the party or affiliated with the party.
Yeah, and I do want to put a link to both of those documentaries that you produced in the show notes because they are really good and they do kind of offer a different perspective on the whole issue than Liz has. Based on your documentary, for the people that haven't seen it yet, how would you say that intersects with Liz's critiques of the direction that the Libertarian Party is taking right now?
Well, so it's interesting covering the Libertarian Party for reason, as a self-proclaimed libertarian, because I have, by definition, a stake in this story. And my stake is, I quite frankly want to see the Libertarian Party succeed. And so the questions that I am asking about the Libertarian Party are to that end. What is it that's not working? I think we can all agree that in its decades of existence, the Libertarian Party, it's grown to be the third largest party in America, but that's kind of like a useless, yes, bronze medal there. It's only the top two that ultimately matter in the big sense of things. And so my question, since about 2020, when I first started asking these questions, was what's it going to take? And what is the actual strategy here? And what do the people who are intimately involved in the party, what do they think about those questions? And what is their strategy? And I discovered that there was a big disagreement. When I first started covering this, it was in the Joe Jorgensen years, after Joe Jorgensen got about 1% of the vote in 2020. And it was kind of like, what is going on here? How is it possible that we have these incredibly unpopular candidates? It's only getting worse over time with what we've seen happen to Biden. And then, Trump's got his own issues. Why is it that something's not popping? Why is this not going to the next level? And at that time, I believe I was the first journalist to speak with Angela McArdle. This was when she was first sort of coming up with the idea or acting as the figurehead to take the party in a different direction. And there was a very stark difference in visions at that time. The chair at that time was named Joe Bishop Henchman. He had a certain vision of the party, which is kind of like, we're going to create this sort of centrist, classical liberal type of party, like the kinds that you see in Europe, where they're part of a coalition government and, they're pro-market, they're tolerant, and they're going to kind of maybe push the scales and ally with the left on certain issues and the right on certain issues. And it's going to make the government somewhat more libertarian. And then obviously Angela and the Mises Caucus has a much more we're going to be kind of radical anarcho-capitalists, and we're going to fly that flag proudly, and we're going to plant it in the ground. And by doing that, we're going to attract the really hardcore, passionate people and build something up from there, from that maybe smaller but more intense core. And those, each of those strategies throughout history have succeeded at times, but they are radically different strategies. And I really wanted to just dig into why they wanted to pursue those different strategies, and to the extent that they are pursuing them, are they succeeding? So
Yeah.
that's been my approach.
Yeah, and I want to get your perspective on the strategy of the LP in just a minute. I guess the last question I have about the article, and I think this was
Yeah.
really, at least for me, this was the thing that was the most concerning to me about the piece. And just to put my cards on the table here, I mean, I love Murray Rothbard and the Mises Institute, and that's so the Mises Caucus does kind of represent my brand of libertarianism philosophically. That doesn't mean I always agree with all of the messaging or necessarily the direction that the caucus takes politically, but I'm more philosophically aligned with that. And one of the problems that I had with like the mainstream media's reaction to the Mises Caucus in 2022, and like one of the first episodes I ever did on the show, I covered what happened in Reno, and I read a part of an article that was published by the Southern Poverty Law Center where they were immediately saying the Mises Caucus was associated with racists and bigots, and I just thought that that was very off-putting. And I think that there were some people that were critical of the article that Liz wrote that maybe seemed to suggest that she was insinuating that there was that connection among some people in the Mises Caucus. So I wanted to ask you about that. Do you feel like that is a fair characterization of maybe not her intent, but maybe something that could have been implicitly drawn from the article? Just what do you make of that? Or do you think it's true? Like, do you think that there are some people in the Mises Caucus that flirt with those ideas?
I remember when that SPLC article dropped. It was right before the Reno reset, and so it was sort of buzzing in the air at the time. And we asked people about it, and I formed an opinion about it. I guess before I get to my opinion, I'll answer your question about Liz's article. I think that from what I recall of Liz's article, it was mostly about the reactions of the donors and the former members who were leaving, and some of them expressed discomfort with the messaging and seemed to think that there's, quote unquote, edgelording. There's this idea that it was some of the messaging around Ukraine and some of the messaging around immigration perhaps was treading into this MAGA territory and even like xenophobic kind of territory. So that was certainly a theme, I think, in Liz's story. I don't think Liz was necessarily asserting her opinion about that. She certainly has opinions, and would anyone who knows Liz Wolfe knows she's not afraid to express them. So she can speak for herself on that. But what I'll say, what I think, does the Mises Caucus condone racism and bigotry, which is the accusation that the SPLC has made, and I guess that you're saying that people are interpreting Liz to have made. I haven't seen them openly do that. What we do have to be real about is the fact that there is a far right movement in America that's unapologetically racist and anti-Semitic. I mean, if you don't have to scratch that far just on X or Twitter to see it. That movement is there. It's thankfully kind of a fringe movement, but it is always looking to find footholds wherever it can, including within the Libertarian Party. There are these people who they're looking to recruit people into their ranks, and a sort of large third party that attracts a lot of disaffected young people. That's good recruiting ground. So that's the reason there was language in the platform that made clear that the Libertarian Party isn't about that. The Mises Caucus made it a priority to remove that language. And talking to the members about why they did that, I think my interpretation is they did so because they saw it as basically an unnecessary virtue signal to the woke. But the fact is that if you're not on guard, that toxic stuff can creep in. People can sneak anti-Semitic imagery into your memes, as we happen to see in an anti-Ukraine image that came from a national account. There was like a this was one of the images that stuck out to me when it was about Ukraine funding and the kind of like the like Jewish guy, like, rubbing his hands together, like that was in one of the images that the national account posted. And then people were calling them out, and it took them a while to take it down. They finally did. And I don't even think the leadership of the party, I'm not even accusing them of purposely doing that. I think possibly there was somebody who knew what they were doing, involved in the social media team, who put that out. I don't know for sure, but these are the kinds of things that you have to be on guard for. And that I think that the Mises Caucus, because they hate the woke, they hate the progressives, that maybe they're not careful enough about, and then it ends up creating embarrassments. There's the Michigan account that I referenced in the documentary, the Michigan State affiliate, where they posted, a Hasidic Jew with hand puppets of the Democrats and Republicans on each of their hands. Like that. That is not the kind of messaging that I, as a libertarian, want to be associated with. And unfortunately, when that stuff gets posted, those are the things that go viral and then kind of stick in people's heads as like, this is what libertarians are about. So basically, if you're not careful and don't kind of like draw a line and say like, we're not about that kind of like gross collectivism, then you are going to let people in who can start subtly pushing the Overton window past just criticism of the state and towards open bigotry. And so you have to protect your movement from that kind of toxic garbage. And I'm not sure if the Mises Caucus is up to that task or not.
I was going to ask you this a little bit later in the interview, but I actually think since you brought it up, this is probably the appropriate place to ask you. I want to talk specifically about the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, because I think that in the mind of a lot of people that have your perspective on this, they're kind of the worst offenders of some of this kind of content. But I'm just like, I'm a good Christian boy from Kentucky, so I would never put any of that stuff on my personal Twitter account. I don't think that would be effective for me, but I can understand the logic of some of that kind of content posting that is considered edgelording. And I think, to me, like the most vivid example of this is a couple of years ago, or I don't know, whenever it happened. It was on the anniversary of the death of John McCain. Libertarian Party of New Hampshire had this infamous tweet where they posted a picture of Meghan McCain crying over John McCain's casket and then said happy holidays. And I remember when I saw that, it's kind of shocking to see it at first, but then you scroll through the comments and you see how angry people are about posting that, but they're not angry about the fact that John McCain's policies led to the deaths of millions of people in the Middle East, which to me seems to be the more grievous injustice. And I think that with some of that kind of posting from LP New Hampshire, it does a great job of exposing the hypocrisy of the American public that would be outraged and offended by those kinds of posts, but then not outraged and offended by what our government is doing to innocent people overseas. Do you see that there's any space for that or any logic for that, or do you just think it's counterproductive and we should be more direct in our critique of government power?
I find it incredibly counterproductive, because what you're saying is it's pointing out this hypocrisy about people being upset about the death of John McCain, or this rude comment about the death of John McCain, but not upset about what John McCain actually did. And that might be how the small group in New Hampshire feels about it. But I think most human beings, when they see a daughter crying over the casket of her father, and you laughing at that, or making fun of that somehow, or actually celebrating that is what the account was doing, they just see that as incredibly callous and inhuman, and not somebody that is worth listening to or having a conversation with. Like, how is that a starting point for a conversation or persuasion. That is repellent to me. And so, and I also think the type of person that you're going to attract with that is just more of this almost like sociopathic, like extremely low empathy, non unable to like recognize like basic humanity type of person. That like that's not really what I think you want to build a movement on. So I find it, whatever like value there is, like I think satire is good. I think exposing contradictions through even some level of shock value can be good. Maybe not for an official state affiliate account, but that example in particular, I just found like almost no redeeming quality to that.
Well, let's go ahead and talk strategy then, because you said, as you as I am as well, we kind of have an investment in the Libertarian Party because we see it as at least politically the vehicle for advancing our libertarian ideas. And the reality is that the Libertarian Party, at least not for the foreseeable future, will have a shot at winning a major national election. Like, we're not going to have a libertarian president in the next couple of election cycles. It's just not possible. But one thing that both Gary Johnson did in 2016 and Joe Jorgensen did in 2020, even though Joe Jorgensen got lower vote numbers than Gary Johnson, is that in all the swing states, the Libertarian Party candidate covered the spread. So to a certain extent, had the LP not existed, the outcome of both of those elections could have been different. So it's not as if the LP doesn't make an impact, because it definitely does. So to your extent, and I know this has been kind of the big debate between the old guard of the Libertarian Party and the Mises Caucus as to exactly what the goal of the Libertarian Party is. So from your perspective, is it about winning elections? Is it about maybe more local elections over national elections? Is it about messaging? Is it about saying, hey, we will support one political party at the expense of the other if you guys will line up behind some of our policies? What do you think the goal of the LP ought to be?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the question I've been trying to ask and prompt the leadership to ask and answer since about 2020. And I suspect that all of those things are important and related. Like, you need solid messaging to grow into the kind of party that can win elections. So, yes, if your message is boring, or just like sort of out of sync with the political moment. That was the criticism that the Mises Caucus had of the former version of the Libertarian Party, and I think they were right to a large degree. You're not going to grow. You're going to remain marginal. So you need solid messaging that actually speaks to something that is missing from the political discourse. They modeled themselves as the Ron Paul 2.0 movement. I don't know if like that's exactly the right way to think about it, because Ron Paul was a certain moment in time, and you can't like recapture a certain moment in time. But what I think they're right about is that Ron Paul spoke to something that was missing in the discourse, which is like the Iraq War was a mistake. And our entire foreign policy is misguided. That was missing from the discourse on both the Democratic and the Republican side. And he brought that to the fore, and from there, he was able to build a real movement, because he spoke to a really important issue that was on everyone's mind that nobody else was speaking to. So I think that's a good instinct and a good sort of mental model that the Mises Caucus has in mind. But so, like, in the meantime, you're right that we're a long way from the Libertarian Party being able to compete in a presidential election. And while you're trying to get towards that, you want to exert influence on the parties who can win. I think that's clearly another aspect of what the current iteration of the party is trying to do. But I do ultimately think that ultimately, the goal does have to be, if you're a political party, to win elections. And all those other things are building towards that. We've got a vast libertarian movement at this point, full of libertarian think tanks, media organizations, podcasts like yours and mine. All these things are out there now to educate people and expose them to libertarian ideas that, like, that ecosystem didn't exist when the Libertarian Party first came into being. So back then, when in the old days, like, the Libertarian Party as this like purely educational institution, maybe that made more sense. Now I would hope that it's, still trying to use its status as a political party to actually gain political power. How you do that in a system that converges on two parties is the $1 million question.
Yeah.
And that's, as I was saying before, that there are these two visions. Do you become sort of like a more centrist party, or do you become like, you try to make like the Javier Milei's party here in America? What the Mises Caucus also seems to, they've got this project decentralization where they're focused on taking really impactful local offices like sheriff and small town mayor, where you can just, once you have that, you can just flout the authoritarian laws and bring more liberty to people. Again, in theory, that sounds like that's very intriguing to me. As far as I know, it hasn't really happened so far. But when Michael Heiss explained it to me, it sounded like a smart plan, because you'd actually be proving in the real world that members of this political party can improve people's lives. And that's, I think, how politics works. You have to kind of prove it out in the real world instead of convincing people through argumentation if you ultimately want to win votes. So that would be my sort of like high level take on where I want to see it going.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And it is a very complicated issue, because I feel like as a third party, the Libertarian Party will always be at a disadvantage. Obviously, Chase Oliver won the nomination, much to the chagrin of the Mises Caucus wing of the party. And I will say again, too, personally, just to put my stake down in this, I like Michael Rechtenwald as a writer and as a thinker. And as a person, I thought that he was the absolute wrong candidate for the Mises Caucus. And I was a big Joshua Smith fan, but I had both Joshua Smith and then Chase Oliver on my show last year to talk about their run. I happen to like Chase Oliver a lot personally. Now, you and Liz had Chase Oliver on your show about a month ago, and I thought you guys gave him an excellent interview. I wish that like CNN would push back on the Democratic candidates in the way that you guys pushed Chase Oliver. I thought you guys asked him a lot of hard questions, and you didn't give him a pass when he didn't give you a satisfactory answer. There are, of course, a lot of people within the Mises wing of the Libertarian Party that have flat out said that they're going to refuse to vote for Chase Oliver. I myself, I like him a lot. I'm on the fence about it. I think all things being equal, I'm probably going to wind up voting for him anyways. But I wanted to get your perspective on Chase Oliver. What do you think about him as a candidate for the Libertarian Party, about his messaging, and then maybe some of his more controversial takes, such as the ones that you addressed on your show, having to do with gender hormone treatment for children under the age of 18, and then also some of his comments in the past about people like Ron Paul and Lou Rockwell.
Okay, well, I like Chase. I mean, I like libertarians generally. Like, so when someone is talking like a libertarian, whether they are from the Chase Oliver wing of the party or the Mises Caucus wing of the party, I tend to like them until they, prove me otherwise. There's certainly libertarians who've, made me not like them. But honestly, when I was at the convention this year, I was talking to people from all parts of the libertarian movement. They were coming up to me, and everyone was friendly. There were lots of Mises Caucus people who came up to me, and they were like, I disagree with all these things about reason, but I appreciate your work. And everyone was friendly to me, and like that's ultimately like where I want to get. I don't want to downplay the important differences, especially in ideology between what some members of the Mises Caucus, like Joshua Smith, believe about something like immigration and what I believe about immigration. I think that's a crucial difference that has to be battled out. But I will say that I feel like we're at a point, just watching that debate with Biden, where he's on the cliff of he's probably walked off the dementia cliff. I think Donald Trump is a serious threat to the rule of law, and it feels like it should be the Libertarian Party's moment to shine. And none of these candidates, honestly, are at the level where it's even like, okay, this is a serious alternative to the Democrats and the Republicans. So as much as I like what Chase has to say about a lot of things, we all know Chase Oliver is not in contention for the presidency. Like,
right.
He might not even be in contention for like 1% of the vote. So that's the bigger problem to me than any individual candidate. That would have been the case no matter who the candidate was, I think. Now, Chase Oliver, I think on those issues that I just mentioned, like immigration, I'm more in alignment with him than someone like Michael Heiss. Than someone like Michael Rechtenwald or somebody like Joshua Smith. There's other issues, I think he's very good on the anti-war issue. He is the only candidate in the race, as far as I know, maybe one of the Green Party candidates or someone who doesn't think that we should just keep writing a blank check to Israel. So that's pretty important. And he's generally he's a principled libertarian. There's been this criticism of him of, he wore a mask or he wasn't critical enough of lockdowns. I mean, going back and looking at his tweets from the time, he was taking principled libertarian stances on that. So on just like the libertarian grade, I think he gets an A from my perspective. I think he's a principled libertarian. We wanted to talk about the puberty blockers conversation. Yeah, that's a complicated one. Liz and I did an episode of our show with Jesse Singal, who's a journalist who is kind of courageously written about the state of the science around childhood transition, and gotten mercilessly attacked for it, because the reality is that the science is just not very good around. The studies have not been very good. We talked about this big meta review that came out of the UK called the Cass Review, where they just looked through all the evidence so far and essentially concluded that the science is bad. And so we need to put a pause on all of this, because you're now raising questions of informed consent. Like, that's important to us libertarians, right? This question of consent, like, we want people to be free and make choices, but they need to not be in the process of being defrauded and not be making these choices under false pretenses. And I fear that we are in a situation where the science has been muddled and overtaken by politics, and people and parents who are making these decisions in consultation with physicians are not really being given that full picture. So the notion of informed consent has been compromised. And so I don't think it's as straightforward as Chase put it, maybe, where you can just say, well, leave it to the parents and the doctors to make all these decisions. What England has done has said, we're putting a pause on puberty blockers altogether. Or sorry, yeah, we're putting a pause on puberty blockers, although you can enroll in clinical trials, in an experimental sense. So at least in this regard, the parents and children who are getting these medications are acknowledging that this is not proven, this is experimental. So at least that's a step towards informed consent. And then they are like really scaling back the access to the hormones for the older, 16, 17-year-olds. That's where it's a real gray area. I don't know the answer to that, because like when do you as a teenager know, like, okay, I want to take these hormones or whatever? Like when are we going to be like, at what point do we say we're okay with that? Are we just going to say 18 years old? I'm not sure. I don't really have any strong feelings about that. I tend to think like with any sort of drugs or substances that 18 is pretty much where we draw the line. So I'm okay with this being a real federalist issue. And like in my state of Florida, if they want to draw the line at 18, I'm not going to throw a big fit about it. So yeah, it's not like I'm sorry I don't have a real strong, like real bold, like this is the libertarian answer to this. But I think it's one of those issues that's really in flux right now because of all the uncertainty and because of all the sort of political suppression of the real science behind it.
Yeah, and I really do think that most of the debates between libertarians occur not because of the philosophy, but how to put that philosophy in practice. But there is a sense, I think, within the libertarian movement, and I think a lot of this goes back to Murray Rothbard, who wrote about this during his career, that there is a split between like left-wing libertarians and right-wing libertarians. And I know that there are a lot of people on the Mises side of the equation that would say that Chase Oliver represents kind of left libertarianism or left-wing libertarianism. And I've also heard a lot of people make the argument that Reason Magazine also kind of represents left-wing libertarianism. So I want to ask you about that. Do you see there being kind of a division between more left-oriented libertarians in terms of how we implement these policies and more, or how we implement this philosophy in terms of policy, and then more right-leaning libertarians? And then do you also see that Reason Magazine has a particular stake on that spectrum?
So I remember, I interviewed, one of the first interviews I ever did at Reason was with a philosopher named Gary Chartier. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, but he is somebody who wrote a book called Markets, Not Capitalism. And to me, that is the exemplar of what left libertarianism is about. It's this idea that there can be no hierarchies or like inequality whatsoever, and that all of that is somehow any sort of hierarchy, whether it's like as simple as a boss at a company, is like this is somehow a creation of the state. And if we had no state, if we had anarchism, everything would be egalitarian. There would be no bosses. That is what I see as left libertarianism, and that's not certainly what I'm all about. I don't think that is the case, and I don't think that is a common belief at Reason Magazine. If you read what our views on economics, I think that just doesn't add up. I do think there is this separate question of, I guess, what you would call social liberalism, and so there's what I've had to, come to terms with is that, I used to think of libertarianism as like, fiscal, the old fiscal conservative, social liberal meme from the 90s. And I've had to come to terms with the fact that that's not really an accurate way to think about it or
Yeah.
talk about it. The reality is there are libertarians who are social liberals and there are libertarians who are social conservatives, and they can all get along so long as they're not trying to impose their view of morality or the good life on the other group. And I think that there are good faith people in both of those camps. And I think both of those exist at reason. Liz Wolfe, for as much as she gets, as much as she stirs up with the Mises Caucus because she doesn't like their messaging, she actually falls in that camp of the more socially conservative libertarian. Like she's a practicing Catholic. She's a devout Catholic. We just did an episode with Trent Horn about the connection between Catholicism and libertarianism. And she is, pro-life. So there's room for that. There's others on staff at Reason who are in that camp. I'll grant to you that most of the staff at Reason, I think, has more socially liberal attitudes. But I would challenge you to find examples of writers at Reason who want to forcibly impose those attitudes using the power of the state rather than persuasion. I think it's going to be hard to find that.
Do you think it'd be fair to characterize, well, because the way I look at this, I guess, is that you have like the Mises Institute, and a lot of the content that they cover at the Mises Institute is more amenable to a right-leaning audience. Do you think that it'd be fair to say that just in terms of the selection of stories, that a lot of what Reason covers might be more it might be more interesting to a left-leaning audience? Not that it's leftist or politically progressive or anything like that, but they just cover issues that progressives tend to care about from a libertarian perspective. And like, to me, before I let you answer the question too, just I think it would make sense, because if you look at like where the Mises Institute is located in Alabama, it's a very conservative part of the country. And I know Reason has offices in Washington, D.C., which is a more progressive part of the country. And so it would make sense that the coverage that they have, even though they're both coming from a libertarian framework, it would be more catered towards the people that they tend to surround themselves with. Do you think that that's a fair characterization?
To some degree, Reason covers issues like a lot of issues like criminal justice reform, which finds more allies among progressives because that is an issue that they've taken up. Although conservatives also, for a time, were on board with that. Drug legalization, these aspects of libertarianism that appeal to progressives, we certainly write about. And when we write about those topics, often, you'll write in mind of like, can I persuade someone who's not a libertarian that this might be a good idea? And who's the audience that might be most persuadable on this point at this moment in American political history? So there might be cases like that where an argument is more tailored to, find common ground with someone on the progressive side. I think that, there's also, we've got people like Robbie Suave, who often writes about these culture war type issues or just kind of like media malfeasance and censorship. And right now, that's an area where conservatives and the right are the ones who are more concerned. Maybe one day that will flip if we get a right-wing authoritarian who starts trying to censor things. Maybe that audience will change. But it really, I think, comes down to an issue by issue. It's an issue by issue basis, what kind of audience that you're going to try to reach with a particular argument. You're right that our headquarters are based in DC. We've got a lot of people in New York. I lived in LA for 15 years. Now I live in Florida. We've got writers in Texas. We've got a guy, JD Truchilli, who lives in like the Arizona desert and writes a great newsletter about kind of like off-grid life. So I feel like we've got a pretty good menu and buffet of options. But on average, yes, I would say that Reason probably appeals from more of a to an audience that, if you were going to go along the spectrum, would be more center right to center left, and maybe the Mises Institute would have an appeal to kind of like center right to further right, and maybe, although interestingly, also kind of like, far left, like really anti-war type of
Yeah.
people as well. So it's hard to map these things, but I do think that the composition of the two staffs, there's certainly more social conservatives affiliated with the Mises Institute than with Reason. There's no denying that.
Yeah. And now my strategy has always been that, I live in Kentucky. So in Kentucky, even the Democrats here own guns. So there is like kind of a libertarian streak in this red state that you wouldn't find in other places. And so my friends that consider themselves to be Democrats, a lot of them don't really understand how the progressive ideology works. Like they're not deep political thinkers. They just know that they were told not to like Republicans, and so they don't vote for them, even though Republicans like Thomas Massie would actually more encapsulate their actual political philosophy than the Democrats that they vote for. But even still, for people that consider themselves to be on the left, I've always kind of recommended Reason Magazine as a great starting point for those people. And for my friends, and this would be, probably like 75% of the people I associate with, just being from Kentucky, the Mises Institute is the place that I would recommend them to start to. And so I think that both of those organizations are like they have a place within the libertarian intellectual tradition, and I think that they can kind of reach different groups and bring them towards the center. I wanted to ask you about that because there is a divide within libertarianism between the Reason Cato wing and then kind of like the Tom Woods Mises Institute, Dave Smith wing of the libertarian world. How do you think that these two groups of libertarians can learn to come together and work with one another instead of just constantly fighting on social media, which seems to be the case now?
I think that a focus on the very important issues where we agree, which are, I think we all agree that the national debt is a huge existential problem that is neither party and neither dominant political tribe is seriously concerned with. They might say something once in a while, but they don't take any action. And I think that will probably be the issue that forces all these other things to be pushed to the side one day. I honestly don't want to see. It's like we're in trouble in a way once the libertarian. It's like the conditions for the libertarian movement to like really unite are kind of disturbing to contemplate. But I think that is maybe where we're headed. I mean, when you look at the rise of Javier Milei in Argentina, it's because they were on the brink of hyperinflation that they were willing that this coalition that he was able to put together, and also just wake a lot of apolitical people up to the realities of inflation being a monetary phenomenon. People were only ready to hear that when like their prices were going up to 200 to 300% a year.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to be economics that pushes these other things to the side. The thing that's hard to get past right now really are some of the, I think things like immigration. It's a serious divide that is hard to, and it's like at the top of voters' concerns right now. And there's there's a serious divide between the camps, between the factions on immigration, and a lot follows from that. And I'm not sure what to do with that. I'm not sure if it's surmountable in the short term.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely seems like it would be a hard bridge a hard bridge to cross there. What's the best way, in your opinion, to promote libertarian philosophy? So take the party away from it, take the intra-libertarian political discourse and debate away from that. What's the best way to convince the average American citizen that libertarianism is the superior social and political philosophy?
I think that it comes down to single issues usually. A lot of times when I ask people why they became libertarians, I mean, there was the Ron Paul moment that turned a lot of people under, let's say, 40 into libertarians. So there's that. But then there's also, like, I talked to a guy who's like, I'm a gambler. Libertarians were the only ones who wanted to legalize online gambling. And I read about it in Reason, and now I'm a libertarian. Like, there's school choice can be an example of that. I don't know. It used to be like, weed smokers were a big part of the libertarian coalition. Now that's kind of done. But yes, single issues like that. I mean, for me, I became a libertarian because of the Iraq War. It was 4 years before Ron Paul, and it was the Bush-Kerry election, and both of them were terrible on the Iraq War. Like, neither of them seemed to acknowledge that this was a mistake, and I'm gonna do something about it. And there was a very little known libertarian guy running named Michael Badnarik, but I Googled the libertarian platform and saw that they had a principled non-interventionist stance. And so that was my issue and so I think people just developing good arguments and sort of specialties where they can lay out, like, in practical terms, like, this is how a libertarian approach to things would solve this one issue that's really important to you. I think that is the most productive way forward.
Yeah, I love that answer. Well, the last question I want to ask you is obviously going to be a very complicated one. We are just months away from the 2024 presidential election. And right now, as of Monday, July 8th at 10:30 in the morning, when we're recording this, Joe Biden is on the ticket for the Democrats. You have Donald Trump, who, again, there is, I'm not 100% sure that he's a lock for November at this point. You have RFK Jr., who's going to be a big disruptor. I don't think we've had anyone since Ross Perot who has had this much kind of like third-party outsider clout in an election. And we have Chase Oliver, and then we'll have the Green Party candidate. What in the world do you think is going to happen between now and November? And again, I think there are more variables in this election than ever before. What direction do you think we're headed?
Yeah. I really hate making political predictions, but
I'm not going to hold you to it. There's no judgment if it doesn't come true.
I mean, it looks to me like Biden is not going to make it to the nomination. And personally, I don't think he should. So I guess my expectation right now is that it's going to be a Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, RFK showdown, and that if it were happening today, I would expect Trump to get into office and be our next president. Yeah, I think right now it really is Trump's to lose. But of course, it all depends on what happens with the Democrats. Who knows what kind of tricks they're going to have to pull out against Donald Trump, too. He's got a million skeletons in his closet, which is why I'm concerned that he might not, politically, he might not be viable come November. But it's very difficult to tell. Do you think that Chase Oliver, and again, I think even if we had a really, really, really popular libertarian candidate that had a lot of name recognition, I still think it would be difficult this time around
down because of RFK running. Do you think that Chase Oliver is going to be able to clear the 1% threshold, or how do you think he's going to perform just in terms of electoral politics? Again, take all of his policy positions in the intra-libertarian controversy out of the equation. He's up against a lot of obstacles that previous libertarian candidates have not been because of ballot access laws and because of RFK. What are his prospects?
Yeah, it doesn't look good to me, especially because he's not going to be on all the ballots as previous candidates have. Partially that's ballot access laws, partially that is the Libertarian Party not making it a priority. Part of it is certain states like Colorado saying we're going to put RFK on the ballot instead of Chase Oliver. So all those factors are going against him. Also, the party is not exactly enthusiastically backing him. Angela McArdle's response was to put on a clown nose and say let's chase Biden out of office and only in the blue states. So doesn't sound to me like there's going to be a sort of all in effort to try to up his vote total. So yeah, I don't have big expectations for that. You say that no matter who the candidate was, this wasn't the year for libertarians. I'm not sure about that. I think the candidates that were on offer, that was the case. You can imagine different paths in the past where the Libertarian Party would be at the moment now, where someone would look at this and say, oh, wow, this party has access to all 50 states. They're well run, they're well managed. I'm a political figure that has name recognition. I like libertarian values. You could imagine a serious person looking at a different set of circumstances and thinking, yeah, this is right. And maybe we'd be having a different conversation right now. So I don't think we should, be deterministic about where we are right now. It had to go this way. Because then that limits our imagination going forward as to what the party could become and what kind of, selling proposition to somebody really exciting in the future it could be. So I guess I'll just leave it there.
Yeah. Well, Zach, thank you so much for your time today. I am really thankful that we had the opportunity to sit down and kind of clear the air on a lot of this stuff. Like I said before, I'm going to be interviewing Jeremy Kauffman in a couple of days, and I'm going to have your episodes released back to back so that people can kind of hear, both sides of that perspective. But I thought you did a great job presenting your case, and I really appreciate your time. Before I let you go, where can people find your work and follow you?
Sure. The show that Liz and I co-host is called Just Asking Questions. It goes up every Thursday on Reason's YouTube channel at 1:00. It also drops as an audio podcast. So if you prefer to listen rather than watch, you can do it, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I still do documentaries. I'm working on one right now about Argentina and the rise of Javier Milei, which should be out in a month or so. So subscribe to Reason TV's YouTube channel for that. And you can always, just go to reason.com to see all my stuff as well.
Well, Zach, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at theprotestantlibertarian@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter. You can follow me at the handle @ProLibertyPod. Again, that is @ProLibertyPod. And you can also visit me at theprotestantlibertarianpodcast.com. At theprotestantlibertarianpodcast.com, you can also support the Christians for Liberty Network and the Libertarian Christian Institute. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode, and we will see you next Tuesday.